Rock climbers scale cliffs and interview.
Climbers can help with bat conservation because we can help scientists find new locations and new habitats that bats live in.
And the more that we as climbers can help biologists, the more that there's an opportunity to be proactive and to show that as a climbing community, we can work alongside conservationists and managers and work in a collaborative partnership.
Because if I know to look for signs of bats and to report them, I'm absolutely happy to do that. Obviously we love being out here, we love nature. Part of the reason we do it, and so being involved in that conservation effort is certainly something that I'd be interested in putting effort into.
Animated bats swoop past a title. Explorers for Bats. Climbers for Bat Conservation. climbersforbats.colostate.edu.
The dream goal for Climbers for Bat Conservation is to develop a community group like climbers that are so impassioned by their role in conserving resources like bats that we develop a new information resource that guides bat biologists in how they identify places to monitor and conserve bats. The only thing that we've asked climbers to do is provide information about where they were climbing, when they were climbing, and if they saw bats. And that is enough right now for us to be able to target areas that we think would be valuable for monitoring. Because white nose syndrome is the title of a disease that's now impacting bats caused by a cold-loving fungus. And that disease has claimed millions of bats in eastern North America, and it's moving its way west. And one of the things that we realized in Colorado and in many western states is we don't have a really good idea where some of those hibernating bat colonies are.
And so we'd like to use the skills that climbers have and canyoneers and hikers to basically be more eyes on the landscape to help us look for signs of bats, information about where they might be found, where they're roosting. And one of the reasons why it's an advantage that we know about white nose and are doing this work now is that we can start to think about ways to address it before it gets here.
Well, I'm looking for bats on Devil's Tower National Monument. And what I'm doing is using this endoscopic camera, and we poke around inside the cracks and try to get as deep as possible in areas that bats may be roosting during the day. And it's important to be gathering data on our bats right now because there is a disease. It's called white nose syndrome. And a lot of the bats out east have been really wiped out. We don't have it in Wyoming yet, so we want to get our baseline data in order.
The camera finds a bat.
And we've barely scratched the surface on the tower. And not only the tower, but other climbing areas out west. So climbers can help us because there's so many other climbers. If they ever see a bat up on the tower while they're climbing, or if they hear one, they can go back down to the kiosk when they're done with their climb and report it. We have a little data sheet like, hey, I found this bat on this climb, on this day. And about where in the climb you can put on there. And then that'll help us out. The next day we can head up there, and hopefully if the bat is still roosting there, we can collect data on that bat, what kind of crack it likes, how high it is on the tower. Because right now it's kind of a needle in a haystack. So if we have a better idea of where we're heading, that can be a big help if climbers are willing to let us know where to find some bats that they might have come across.
Black Hills National Forest.
There's a couple different ways that we monitor bats. We use mist netting to capture them in nets, and we also set up acoustic detectors to try to find the bats acoustically flying by and get some activity rates and also identify those species. We're trying to get a basic idea of the amount of species that are on the monument property and also ways that they're using the landscape and use the best management practices to protect them.
A researcher measures a bat and shines a light through its wing.
The effort to conserve bat species from white nose syndrome is a big interagency response. We have been working with the National Forest, and we've been working with Matt Stefanich. He's a biologist there. And Matt and I have set up some acoustic detectors together. We've also talked about how to best manage the species and respond to the disease if it were to come.
Until a few years ago, the Black Hills National Forest and Devil's Tower National Monument really didn't have a working relationship where we did a lot of things together. But unfortunately, it took a disease like white nose syndrome to get us to the point where we need to recognize bat habitat requirements. And Devil's Tower being a close neighbor to us, we've really had an opportunity recently to join forces and combine our knowledge and work across federal agency lines to try to understand what is good for the bat and for bat habitat. But we can't do any of this by ourselves, and any information we can get from climbers, from rock hoppers, from hikers, anybody that's out there where we have bats, to help us identify suitable roost habitat for these bats, where they see bats, would be a huge help to us in understanding what these bats need to survive.
In a crevice, a bat scratches the fur on its neck. Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument.
The draw for the public in Grand Staircase is the variety. I mean, look behind us. We got Calf Creek Falls here, absolutely stunning. You have this desert environment with an oasis in the bottom of it. But there's a reason this was the last place in the United States to be mapped. It's because it's very incised with canyons. And I think monitoring for bats in the Grand Staircase is important because it's going to give us a baseline of information of what do we have here currently without white nose, assuming it's not here. What we have is a landscape with a lot of sandstone and cliff country with cracks and crevices and flakes of rock. And what that creates is really good roosting cover for our bat species. So the canyoneering community can be very important in giving us information about what's out on the landscape. As the canyoneers are making their way through these areas, what they should look for is the staining of rock. So you may see up in some of these crevices what looks like some drippings, and what that is it's urine and guano that we would look for to begin our monitoring to see if bats are indeed using an area. These canyoneering groups especially are important because they get to places where even 90% of the general public that comes here is not going to go. And so they can give us information that could be useful to us as we try to manage the monument.
And the biggest challenge is trying to figure out how many there are, really. And part of that is Utah's crevice roosting bats roosts in handfuls, 2s and 3s, 1s, 2s and 3s, and they're spread everywhere, so it's kind of hard to really get your handle around that. So there's a lot of cave and cliff roosting opportunities here, which is where the climbers and canyoneers would come in, because it's important to know where bats roost so we can protect those roosting resources. What I would suggest to cavers and canyoneers and climbers is that they kind of use the same attitude that medical professional does, do no harm. And that can be in 2 different ways. If you do come across bats, please do tell us about them. But if you can avoid them, please do so. The other way to do no harm is to not bring any equipment into Utah or a state where white nose doesn't exist from a state where it does exist unless that equipment is brand new equipment. And this is the kind of cooperation that's going to help us keep our bats safe.
Bats dart around a night sky. Yosemite National Park.
Yosemite is one of the most popular places to climb in the world. It's iconic. It's a place that climbers come from all over the world. We have such an opportunity here in Yosemite to interact with the climbing community, to build support among climbers and among scientists for bat conservation. And climbers are inherently environmentalists. They love the environment, they love the wild places. I think that's part of the draw. So it's important that climbers be aware that they can look for bat sign, they can look for guano and dark streaking where bats have been. And if a climber encounters a bat, they can record the route, the pitch of the route, the conditions, what the weather is like, and also the time that they encountered that bat. And that will be communicated to our biological technicians, and we'll follow up on that information and monitor those bats. Our mission is to preserve and protect these resources for the enjoyment of future generations, and those are our kids.
These sounds down here, they're in our hearing aid. A group of kids spot a bat.
And we want kids to get fascinated by bats and to carry that ethic throughout their lives, that we share this space with wild things and that we need to continue to protect them and protect the habitat that they live in.
Acadia National Park has really led the charge for bat research in the entire state of Maine. And, you know, there's a group called the Maine Bat Working Group. And the plan for us is to find where those remaining population of bats are and do whatever stewardship we can to grow the population into the future.
In 2007, we had a robust population of bats. But then once white nose syndrome caused massive mortality of bats hibernating in caves, our populations dropped, and species that were once the most common on the island, little browns and northern long-eared, are virtually gone. So the Fish and Wildlife Service identified 2 critical phases of the bat's life stages. One of them is in the winter in hibernation, and the other is during the maternity period. We are hoping that some bats that somehow survive the fungus, they'll go forward and reproduce and start this slow process of restoring bat populations. That's why it's important to protect those 2 habitat factors, because they're already struggling with a lot of situations. So the more we can learn about those 2 key components, the better off we're going to be. And climbers can be really critical in us being able to achieve a chance of restoring bats, because we suddenly realized that bats were staying in places besides these big, large mines or caves, what we now call non-traditional roosts. And those non-traditional roosts are talus slopes or rock faces, because those have made these sort of small miniaturized caves. So by having that information at different cliff faces where climbers are, or people are hiking or walking, and just reporting that they saw a bat out on the landscape, pretty much can give us an idea then of where we might start to focus attention. Because Acadia has hundreds of cliff faces and probably as many talus slopes. And the more we get input from scramblers, hikers, and climbers, it starts to tell us all kinds of stuff about what those bats are seeking out. That is critical information. Then it's a cooperative venture that is really winning for everyone.
A volunteer records data, then releases a bat. It flies off into the night. Report bat sightings to help with bat conservation. Bat sightings at colostate.edu. Spread the word. Bats are cool and need your help. This film was funded through a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and administered by the Wildlife Management Institute. Principal investigators: Rita Dixon, Idaho Department of Fish and Game; Ann Froschauer, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service; David McGowan, Ravenswood Media Incorporated; Robert Shore, Climbers for Bat Conservation, Colorado National Heritage Program; Michelle Verant, National Park Service. Interviewees: Ben Scott, Northern Colorado Climbing Coalition; Zach Warren, Nebraska Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit; Kyle, climber; Robert Shore, Climbers for Bat Conservation, Colorado Natural Heritage Program; Bronwyn Hogan, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service; Phil Necht, National Park Service; Amy Hamsfar, National Park Service; Matt Stefanich, USDA Forest Service; Cameron McQuivey, Bureau of Land Management; Keith Day, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources; Breezy Jackson, National Park Service; Corey Mosby, Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife; Bruce Connery, National Park Service. For more information about white nose syndrome, visit whitenose syndrome.org.